Hello, I'm back. I've supplied you with a lecture model. Each week, generally on Mondays, I will administer the lectures. The models cover what I want you to know for the quiz. Now, I will provide overview for the sake of the flow of the chapter. And I'll let you know until you guys pick up on the rhythm of the lectures and what I want you to know and what is just, overview. I'll let when it's time to write. And after a couple of these, I think you guys will, like I said, pick up on the rhythm of that. But for the sake of the chapter flow, I will provide some overview as well. But what you need to know for the quiz, I will highlight here, and to some degree on the supplemental reading that will you guys will have to deal with. Now I'm putting this together on a Saturday night. You guys are watching this hopefully on a Monday. So tomorrow, Tuesday, you guys will get a supplemental reading and an audio visual. So I'm going to be, probably taking some things from those, and you'll see those on a quiz as well as the discussion posts. Can't forget about those. The lecture models will have some fill in the blanks, as you can see. Some of you guys have those printed out. And for the sake of time, um, we'll do fill in the blanks. But there's also some white space too to write your notes. I mean, we're in college. Now, at those junctures, right, you can stop the video and record your notes. When you're finished with the lecture, you can complete a comprehension assignment, and that is also on um, the course page, and it's in the assignment section. This week, it will be in the form of a sum it up sheet, and you can do this in a way that you desire. Personally, I would suggest filling out the sum it up sheet after you go through a concept on a lecture. I would also strongly suggest that when filling out the sum it up sheets, that you just don't write the answers out word for word from the notes, because for one, you're not going to learn anything by doing it that way. I would go over the notes, go back over the concept, and just turn the paper, turn the notes over, and write out the summaries in your own words. The other thing too, I would say, I'm going to be looking at these, and if they're word for word, copies of the notes, it's probably gonna affect your grade. And then finally here, I would say that having the comprehension assignment is proof that you attended the class that day, as long as I get the assignment by 11:59 p.m. And that goes, for the entire week. The assignments that I have from Monday through Friday, as long as I get them by 11:59, I look at that as you're present for class. Okay, now for the lesson. Let me ask you to take no more than a minute. No more than a minute. And I'm going to ask you just to jot down an explanation as to what you think the discipline of geography is. Take a minute to do that, and we'll talk about that shortly. See how accurate you were. Okay, unless you have taken Introduction to Geography, you know that geography is more than the study of mountains and maps. If you haven't taken Introduction to Geography, like most people, when I ask that question, and that's what they say, their answer is, the study of mountains and maps. And that's true. That's true to um, an extent. It's true to an extent, but it's so much more, so much more. And it does. I mean, because geography, it shapes humans. It shapes humans, and humans shape geography as well. And so much of that comes down to how folks um, order the world and perceive it, which in more than a few cases has been shaped by geography since the beginning of time. Religion has also been affected by geography, which affects a region's politics, right, et cetera, et cetera. Well, if you take a look at the lecture model, you will see some white space at the very top. So at that place, I will give you kind of a semi-pinhead definition of the definition of the discipline of geography. And I should probably add here too, um, for you visual types, you people learn by seeing, you'll benefit from having your textbooks nearby, right? Textbook visuals, as I do reference them from time to time. In fact, fairly regularly with each lesson. Now, the objectives for this chapter. The objectives, we're going to recognize spatial patterns in the physical and human world. We're going to understand spatial patterns, how they're distributed, and how they relate and change. We're going to understand how regional geography provides a spatial view to where folks live and make meaning of life. And finally, we will become aware of globalization and how that has changed and may even be affected, at our present time, present hour, because of politics, electoral politics right here in the United States. Some of the heads up terms here, and I call these heads up terms because these are terms that I kind of deem will be unfamiliar to most folks, and I'm going to talk about them during the lecture. But I feel that if I discuss them a little bit before we get there, it'll help you to understand the concept a little bit better once we get there. Human geography, we're talking about human activities. Physical geography, the natural environment. Spatial view, this is where folks live and the places that they occupy. Region, this is the area with characteristics that distinguish it. Regional geography, that evaluates those those differences. Nodes, these are cones of activity that bring a place in contact with the wider world. Globalization, just the intertwining of the world's economic systems and cultures. Localization, just the opposite, the inverse of that. Local identities, local customs, um, more natural, nationalistic perhaps. Feudalism. I know some of you probably had crossed paths with this term, perhaps in anywhere from grades 7 through 12. I kind of wrote this out here. I was thinking about this. How can I explain this, a very complicated economic system, in a succinct way? And I kind of came up with this. It was a dominant social system in medieval Europe, in which the nobility held lands from the crown or / government in exchange for military service. And vassals, in turn, were in turn tenants of the nobles, while the peasants or the serfs were obliged to live on their lord's land and give him homage, labor, and a share of the produce in exchange for military protection. Global choke points. The global choke points are narrow waterways that go through either a country or a narrow passageway that is controlled by a country, and it's basically shipping lanes. And the countries that control those choke points, a lot of political leverage there. Some of the, and I'll dwell on some of those a little bit more once we get there later in this lecture. But some of the major ones you guys have heard of, the Suez Canal. We'll take a look at a illustration of the Suez Canal, the Strait of Hormuz. I'm going to look at those two. Some of the other ones, the Northwest Passage, Panama Canal, right? Some of your, I'm thinking there, four of your major global choke points. So, okay, so let's look at this. What is geography? And like I said, you have some white space there. Take some notes. And here we go. Geography is a discipline. Geography is a discipline that studies spatial patterns in the human and physical world. And it asks a couple questions. How and where humans and natural features of the earth are distributed, how they relate to each other, and how they change. And I would say this too, you should probably write this down. Geographers examine the distribution of such things as vegetation and language. And you don't have to write this, but I would just say too there that regions are not, regions are man-made. Regions are man-made, or they're human constructs. And what geographers do is they look for patterns, such as vegetation patterns, or language patterns of language, climatic patterns, and they therefore dub certain areas as particular regions. So they look for patterns. Now, just a little overview here. You don't have to really write anything here, just a transition into geographic study matter. Geographic studies are important as there's tremendous amount of diversity, connectivity, and change among human and physical features. The world we live in is very dynamic, with constantly changing spatial patterns, changing human, environmental, political, economic, and social interactions. So world regional geography provides a framework to enable us to make better sense, if you will, of the complexities of our world. So the discipline of geography is one that provides a spatial view of the world, whereby geographers study, again, spatial patterns, and they attempt to explain them. Geography sometimes is divided into physical geography, which examines the Earth's natural environment, and human geography, which is the study of distributions of people and their activities. So, combining all that, world regional geography incorporates these elements of both types of analysis. Well, let's take a look at this. Geography, break this down a little bit. Geography and geographic study matter. Geographers use several approaches. They establish scientific laws to explain observations. They investigate meanings that folk give places, linking significance of individual choice to roles of institutions like governments, marriage rights, etc. Types of subject matter: physical and human geography. Physical and human geography. Physical geography, natural environmental processes. Looking at, again, climate, plant life, soils, mountains, and rivers. The study of human environment looks at relationships, at both the impact of the environment on human activities and vice versa. Geography as the study of places and flows among those places. Geography provides a place or space-related spatial view. Places on the Earth's surface as the environment or spaces where folks live and where they make meaning out of life. I'm thinking too here, thinking ahead, as you guys are watching this on a Monday, tomorrow, one of your assignments for me is going to be watching a video called Human Geography Data Collection. And you're going to take a look at one young lady who, a geographer, and this is what she does. She collects data on, on this very thing, human geography, this very study. So I thought, as we're covering this concept here, I would like for you to, at the least, as an FYI, to look at that a little more in depth and write about that and get back to me on that. Latitude and longitude, page 6 and 7. I'm going to skip this, but latitude and longitude, some nice visuals there. Talking about absolute location, the precise places on the Earth's surface, prime meridian, the prime meridian, distance and direction, scale of size of maps. You can take a look at that, on your own. I'm not going to quiz you on that, but it might behoove you to take a look at that. I guess the other thing too, I'm thinking you probably had that covered, perhaps in high school. But on pages 6 and 7, you can take a look at those visuals. Let me get into regions. Talk about geography of regions. And when we talk about geography of regions, it's regional geography. And regional geography evaluates differences and similarities within and between defined areas or regions of the Earth's surface. The first point here is dynamic concepts of regions. And regions are defined, as I mentioned earlier, they're defined and created by the geographers for specific purposes. No region endures forever because the world's changing, and so are the perceptions of the people. So the relationships between human and natural environment features are basic to understanding of regional geography. Recently, studies assess the impacts of human activities on the physical environment. So, regions are dynamic because of the internal and external flows of patterns of people, goods, and ideas. Nodes are places where flows begin, intersect, or end. May define a regional boundary. Could be a store in a town, a restaurant, or a capital city. I know here in my county, Somerset County, back in the 1980s, I think it was, in order to gin up commerce and economic opportunities here in Somerset. They had built a mall here in town that was basically outlet stores in order to get people to come off the turnpike. Turnpike comes right through Somerset, and spend money on the outlet stores. And it's right next to a kind of surrounds a very beautiful mansion, which serves as an inn and restaurant. And people would, shop and then eat at the big mansion and stay at the inn. And to make a long story short, there, as I speak, that mall basically, I mean, for whatever reason, it didn't work. It didn't. A lot of the stores went belly up, and it's basically services now, doctor's offices, a gym, and um, and the beautiful mansion just sits there unoccupied, looking for a buyer. So, but I digress a little bit. But nodes, right? Nodes, they serve as cones of activity. Could be, like I said, something as big as political boundary, some kind of economic activity. Could be something as small as a store in a town. It's basically a node will serve as some kind of a cone of activity that takes an area and links it with the wider, the wider world. Making and remaking regions. People create regions. People create regions. People living in a region determine its characteristics. Human interactions at crucial places of history set a region apart from other regions. Folk inside or outside of a region are frequently aided by the press, media, or government propaganda, which gin up their own perspectives of a region's identity. In other words, residents may then see their relations with others as hostile or friendly as a result. So human actions are ultimately most important in defining regions. Um, Folks live differently in even similar natural environments. Moving on with the concept here of geography of regions, people remake regions. People remake regions. Boundaries between regions can change over time. Classic example of this are the boundaries on the continent of Africa. The Europeans, when they colonized Africa, they carved up a lot of the boundaries that were there, and only to cause problems after they left. I guess the last European powers got out of Africa in very early 1960s, but only to leave a lot of controversies with the African tribes about whose boundary was what. Regions interact with other regions. No region is secluded. You'd be hard pressed to find that. Folks in coastal towns of China, right? Vietnam are making goods, in the United States. Some areas affect surrounding regions through their role in funneling trade, through narrow ocean route um, throughways. Wealthy countries defend passes of ships through global choke points like the Northwest Passage, Suez Canal, Strait of Hormuz, and Panama Canal. On your in your textbooks on pages 330, 331, there are some illustrations of what I want to show you here. Let's see here. Here is, I think your author, though, I think with the Strait of Hormuz, the author, I think one of the reasons I have this up here is your author doesn't really um, point out where the Strait of Hormuz actually is. But if you look at page 330, 331, and cross-reference it with this, you can see, I think in your textbook also, the author doesn't get real specific. You'll see the Indian Ocean there, and the Indian Ocean turns into the Arabian Sea and the Gulf of Oman, I'm sorry, and then you can see the Strait of Hormuz, which leads into the Persian Gulf, and it's controlled by Iran. So a lot of political leverage, for Iran, right? Passage of ships and We're talking about trade and economic activity there. And then you have what you may be a little more familiar with, the Suez Canal, right, coming out of the Red Sea, and you could see, this narrow, waterway, throughway out to the Mediterranean Sea, right in between Egypt, going right between the country of Egypt. So the Egyptians control the Suez Canal, a lot of political leverage there. So just a couple of pictures there of some of the major thoroughfares. And let's see, get back to this. Okay, there we go. Regions are used by those in power. I see some white space there. You guys can get some writing. Not a lot of writing there, but nevertheless, regions are largely influenced by powerful governments, non-governmental institutions, what we call NGOs, and multinational corporations. So right there is your definition of geography different than what you wrote down? If it is, that's generally the case. You're not alone. We talked already about the two types of subject matter in regional geography: human and physical geography. How are regions defined and created? By geographers for specific purposes. Can regions change? Yes. Are they generally independent from one another? No. Be hard pressed to find that. Lastly, last concept, I want to talk about globalization and give you guys a timeline on that development. Just a little overview to kind of set that up. Two geographic trends of globalization and localization help geographers understand the current structure of world regions, especially the interaction within and among regions since the outset of the 21st century. Globalization is the increasing connectivity among the world's peoples and places, which oftentimes results in increasing similarities among the regions. While frequently examined within the context of economic exchanges, globalization exists in many forms, including informational, social, cultural, political, and environmental interconnection. Localization, on the other hand, refers to local identities that exist among places, countries, and regions. Identities are often defined by political nationalism, local customs and practices, religious differences, and resistance to globalizing forces. Regions have been created and recreated throughout the history of human occupation. And they've evolved as agricultural practices emerged, trading networks became established, and political institutions waxed and waned. So given the global scale of interaction among the people and the forces of localization, one should expect, right, that the dynamic nature of the world, regional geography, is going to continue. Let's break this down. Globalization and the origin of world regions. Well, it starts out prehistory, right? Prehistory until around 5000 BC, most humans lived in small family-based groups, hunting and gathering. Then it develops into settled farming, right? The first settled farming began in a few areas of Southeastern Asia, followed by areas of China and other Asian areas, and the Americas. Now, when I talk about the Americas here, we're talking about Central America and South America. North America is really the Johnny come lately on the world scene. But there's some early staple crops, and when I talk about staple crops, talking about basic food. Some early staple crops was located, right? You had wheat and barley in Southeast Asia, rice and millet in China. Millet was like a cereal grain. Corn, squash, beans, potatoes, and tomatoes in the Americas. And can't eat this, but paper. Paper was developed in the Americas during this time. Then, globalization timeline moves into city-states and empires. Early civilizations were marked by irrigation farming. Much wealth was expressed in major buildings and the technical development of writing. Early civilizations saw large surpluses of farm products from their societies. They in turn remade regions into something new and distinctive. Productive irrigation farming was found along the lower Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Ancient Mesopotamia, today modern day Iraq, the Huanghe River in China, and along the coast of Peru and South America. And for you visual types, some nice illustrations over on over on page 17, figure 111, that you may want to check out. Then you have trading empires and classical civilizations. By 200, you had trade routes for high value goods extended between Rome and China along the Silk Road. In the Americas, you have the Mayas developed their own writing system, building cities around huge public buildings by AD 250. Again, page 17, some illustrations of that. I think and there's one illustration that actually labels the Silk Road. You can see that extended from East China, the East Chinese coast, right to the city of Rome. The latter part of the Roman Empire. Then you had disruptions, migrations, and feudalism, right? Feudalism, I dwelt on that earlier, that people received military protection in exchange for working a proportion of their time for a local warlord. So the warlord gave allegiance to higher orders of knights, kings, and emperors. The downsides were that trade got hurt. Trade got hurt, and everything was just too local. Everything was too local, and there were no stable boundaries. There were no stable boundaries. And just kind of FYI here, you don't need to know this, but for your information, there were no stable boundaries, and the bubonic plague hit. And before people knew that there was a pattern to the bubonic plague, that it was just going along trade routes, folks didn't know, the rhyme or reason of who was getting sick and how that was taking shape, the trajectory of the plague. But as you guys know, with diseases are no respecter of persons, and we had warlords dying, just as easy as a serf peasant would. And so when warlords would die, you had these boundaries that were blurred. Who owned what, and then fighting would start, and that was the beginning of your lawyer classes in a predominant way. There were lawyers around for a long time, but in a predominant way, the lawyer class really took off during that time period to decide who owned what, where the boundaries were. Someone's always fighting over a boundary, right? You have the modern globalizing world. New systems of trade and wealth expansion developed in Western Europe by 1450 AD. New maritime technology. You had zeal for merchants to make profits, and a missionary zeal to spread Christianity. And then industrialization and colonization. After gaining independence in late 1950s, maybe as late as early 60s, the colonies, African colonies, Asian colonies, some of the Middle Eastern areas, were still economically dependent on their colonizers. Figure 113, page 19. Some nice, I've got one or two nice visuals there to illustrate that. Then globalization, countries, and protectionism. British merchants invested their new wealth from overseas ventures, their days of colonization, in factory-based concentrations of manufacturing. So advantages during that time period, especially for the British, were gained through trade, military, and colonialism. And then after World War II and the Cold War, after World War II, globalization was polarized between Cold War superpowers, the United States, Soviet Union, roughly between 1950 and, I can be specific about this. The Soviet Union dissolved last week of December 1991. International institutions came into being, though, within that time frame. You had the UN, a diplomatic peacekeeping entity, to keep the superpowers from blowing each other up. NATO, a military economic arm, pretty much funded by the United States, still is, in order to protect Western Europe from a Soviet advancement, and there were others. Today, in this very hour, globalization is again under some assault here in the United States. You guys are going to take a look at a reading tomorrow, Tuesday, about this regarding the Trump administration. Right, the Trump administration has, you could argue, put a kind of a wrench in the momentum of globalization. So I'll have you guys read a little bit about that. Sure, it's no secret that there's a lot of animosity toward Mr. Trump and his administration, and some of that is coming from beyond Washington. Some of that's coming from international headquarters, like Brussels and The Hague, and so they're not really popping champagne corks over some of Mr. Trump's rhetoric and actions toward globalization. So if you have your graphic organizer is again, for you visual types, it's a visual wrap-up of the concepts, and I want to go over that, and then talk about some other things this week. So we looked at globalization and world regions today. We looked at geography, study spatial patterns in the human and physical world. It studies how and when humans and natural features of the earth are distributed, how they relate and change. Globalization of world regions is about study matter, right? Study of places and institutions. It studies scientific laws, the subject matter, physical and human geography. Globalization in world regions, well, it's a geography of regions, right? Regions are remade, boundaries change. They are made by the media, government, by people. They're dynamic, they change. They get created and defined by geographers. They're used by those in power, governments, NGOs, multinational corporations, and they interact with other regions through trade, global choke points. And then we took a look at the timeline of globalization, prehistory, hunting and gathering societies, 5000 BC, settled farming in China, Asia, and the Americas, city-states and empires, irrigation, farming, building construction, writing, trading empires and classical civilization around 8200, through the Silk Road and trade routes. Silk Road was the major trade route. And then you had the feudal period, society becomes localized, trade was interrupted, and really no stable boundaries. The modern world, advent of the modern world about 1450 AD through maritime explorations, prophets, the plague, spread of Christianity. I'd mentioned the bubonic plague earlier too. I should probably say that part of your maritime explorations were driven by fear of the bubonic plague. Folks just wanted to get off the continent, and they were, willing to risk uncharted waters in order to do that. And enterprising minds were like, yeah, we can make navigable devices and maps and make profits, and so you had some of that in that time period. Then you had industrialization and colonization, and in the Cold War world, polarized in the U.S. and Soviet client states. Colonies gained independence during that time as well. The colonies, the Europeans, Western Europe were your basic colonizers, and they were supposed to be free and democratic, right? And the Soviet Union would use that as propaganda to the people that were being colonized. It was saying, hey, come over to us. You see, we don't do those types of things. And they do. The democracies do. And so there was a little bit of, a lot of pressure on England, France, Germany, and the Dutch, and some others to maybe dial it back and get out of some of these places. Of course, you had revolutions too. A lot of the locals did not want the Europeans there. And the Europeans were also being drained by 2 world wars. So you had several things going on. Soviets, they didn't colonize. They never did that. They would just roll tanks into nearby places and get leverage that way. And then globalization. Globalization, like I said earlier, globalization, probably not a term that was talked about. Maybe I didn't bring this up. It was, you didn't really hear about the term globalization until the Soviet Union dissolved. So I'm thinking George H. Bush's administration from 89 into to 93. 92, 93, and there you started to hear about it. You really didn't hear that term before then. So that's kind of a wrap on that. Now, what's due today are the Sum It Up sheets. The Sum It Up sheets are just basic comprehension exercises, and you'll see something like that every Monday to coincide with the lectures, to help you understand the material better, to know it, to be able to pass those important things like the quizzes. So, and then tomorrow I will have published for you a reading. A reading. I'm trying to get a title of it right now, but it's about globalization, the Trump administration, and it's yeah, like I said earlier, kind of a maybe the wrench that it's putting in the momentum of globalization. I can't remember the title right now, but it's going to be there. It'll be published tomorrow, and I have a 7.5 minute video clip I want you to see about actually how someone studies human geography. Right, some of the details that I think you'll find interesting. So again, keep abreast of the announcements and stuff. I use that a lot. And so until then, until next time, you guys be good and